My daughter introduced me as part of the staff at her own wedding, and pretended she didn't even know me. Her wealthy new in-laws ridiculed my outfit as if I were invisible. I stood there and let their laughter echo through the grand ballroom until they were finished. Then I quietly took the microphone and made a single announcement that froze every smile in the room. The moment I spoke, their faces drained of color. My daughter met my eyes and without hesitation said with chilling calm, "Excuse me, but the staff entrance is in the back." Not a flicker of recognition crossed her face while the guests turned to stare at the woman in the plain blue dress from a discount store. The mother she had just erased in front of Boston's social elite stood holding a wrapped box that had cost 3 months of savings. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. Standing in that marble-floored country club, I felt something deep inside me splinter. It wasn't my heart, that had been slowly fracturing for 2 years. It was the final strand of hope snapping clean apart. You might assume that after raising a child for 29 years, through sleepless nights, scraped knees and broken teenage hearts, a parent would at least deserve acknowledgement at her child's wedding. But wealthy people have a remarkable talent. They can make you vanish even when you are standing right before them. Next to my daughter Claire stood Nathan's mother, Margaret Whitmore. She let out a tinkling laugh that sounded like a crystal glass cracking. "Oh, darling," she murmured to my daughter, "your staff really ought to know better than to use the main entrance." I glanced down at my navy blue dress, the finest thing I owned purchased specifically for this day. At 63 years old, I had become skilled at scouring clearance racks and stretching every dollar until it begged for mercy. 3 months of overtime at the insurance office had paid for that dress, the wedding gift, and the gas to drive all the way from Hartford. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice steady even as an earthquake rumbled inside my chest. "I must have made a mistake." A security guard began to approach, a kind-eyed man in his 50s who likely had daughters of his own. "Ma'am, if you could just—" he started, but I cut him off gently. "Of course," I said. "No scene. Not here." I would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I turned toward the exit, but not before glancing at Claire's face. For just one fleeting second, a shadow passed across her features, recognition. She knew precisely who I was. She knew, and she had chosen to deny it. That was when I realized this wasn't confusion or embarrassment. It was deliberate. The story of how my daughter became a stranger began 18 months earlier, the day she brought Nathan Whitmore home for the first time. I should have noticed the warning signs back then. But a mother's love has a way of softening every sharp edge. "Mom, this is Nathan," she had said, her tone oddly careful and rehearsed, as though she were performing a role I hadn't been given the script for. Nathan was the picture of polished perfection, handsome in that costly way with immaculate hair, flawless teeth, and a handshake that lasted exactly 3 measured seconds. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly, "Claire has told me so much about you." What he truly meant was that she had told him enough for him to treat me as a problem to be managed. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing that dinner. Pot roast, creamy mashed potatoes and green beans fresh from my garden. The same meal I made for every birthday and celebration of Claire's life. The same dish she used to beg for when she was 8 years old and homesick at summer camp. Nathan toyed with his food as if contact with it might somehow damage his trust fund. "This is very authentic," he said finally. That word, authentic, landed like an insult, as though I were some exhibit in a museum of humble origins. Claire barely touched her plate, her eyes darting to Nathan's face for approval. Every detail of my modest home seemed to offend him. The chipped plates that had served countless family meals, the budget store tablecloth, the framed photos from road trips to national parks and small motels. "Mom still has that picture from when I was 10, she had said with a laugh that sounded more like an apology, pointing to our photo at the Grand Canyon. "How quaint," Margaret Whitmore had commented a month later during her visit. She'd said it in the same tone one might use for, "How tragic." That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I thought I was watching my daughter fall in love. In truth, I was watching her drift away from me one manicured step at a time. The real breaking point arrived with a phone call on a Tuesday evening in March. I was at the kitchen table, grading insurance claims, the same table where I had helped Claire with her homework for 12 years, when her name flashed across my phone screen. "Mom, we need to talk," she began, her voice cold and clipped. There was no cheerful "Hi, Mom" or even a hint of warmth. Only that sterile business tone she had adopted since Nathan came into her life. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I asked. For a few seconds I could hear distant chatter. Refined voices discussing wine vintages and stock portfolios. She was at the Whitmore residence again. "It's about the wedding planning," she said. "We've been reviewing the guest list and some adjustments need to be made." I set down my pen. "Adjustments?" I asked, careful and calm. "Nothing major," she said quickly. "It's just that Nathan's family has certain expectations regarding the tone of the event. They prefer something very formal, very traditional. 40 years of single motherhood had taught me when silence speaks louder than questions." I waited. "The thing is, Mom," she continued, hesitating, "your friends from work in the neighborhood might not feel comfortable in that environment. It's going to be very upscale, very different from what they're used to." There it was, the knife sliding in without resistance. "I see," I replied. "And what about your godmother, Janet? Your cousin Denise, who drove 12 hours to help you move to college?" "This isn't personal, Mom. It's just practical. We want everyone to feel comfortable." Comfortable? As if my friends and family were a burden that needed to be hidden away. "How many of my guests are we talking about removing, Claire?" I asked quietly. A long silence followed. Then, with that same polished detachment she'd learned from her new world, she said, "Well, we've reserved 3 seats for your side. Just you, Aunt Diane, and maybe Mrs. 3 seats. That was all she had given me. 3 seats, one for Mrs. Graham from next door, who had practically helped raise her, one for my sister Diane, and one for me, the woman who had raised her alone since her father died when she was 7 years old. 3 seats to represent a lifetime of devotion. 3 seats for nearly 30 years of unconditional love, scraped knees and quiet sacrifices." "I understand," I told her, though in truth I didn't. "Not really." My voice came out steady, but my thoughts were a storm. She said, "You're upset," as if my reaction were the problem. I managed, "I'm processing." That night, I sat in my small living room surrounded by open photo albums spread across the coffee table. I flipped through the pages slowly, each one a fragment of the life I had built for her. Birthdays decorated with dollar store streamers and homemade cakes. School plays where I clapped from the back row while other parents sat arm in arm. Family vacations built on coupons and gas money. Each photograph was proof of my love and her laughter. And yet, none of it seemed to count in the world of the Whitmores of Boston. Meeting them in their natural environment was like stepping into a documentary about a rare and unfamiliar species. Their Beacon Hill mansion, and yes, they proudly called it a mansion, not a house, had more square footage than my entire neighborhood combined. Margaret Whitmore greeted me at the door wearing pearls the size of grapes and a smile that was more a weapon than a welcome. "Evelyn," she said in a voice smooth as glass, "how lovely to finally meet you properly." She spoke my name as though it were something unpleasant she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Please call me Dot," I offered with a small smile. "Everyone does." "Oh, I couldn't possibly," she replied, her lips barely moving. "Names hold such importance, don't you think? They reveal so much about one's background." Nathan's father, Richard Whitmore III, because apparently Richard Whitmore II hadn't been enough, barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal when Margaret introduced us. The man had elevated indifference to an art form, managing to make you feel invisible while standing 2 feet from him. "Claire tells us you work in insurance," Margaret said as she guided me through halls lined with portraits in gilded frames. "How practical." The way she said practical made it sound contagious. "I'm a claims adjuster," I clarified gently. "I help people rebuild after disasters." "How noble," she murmured, her tone suggesting she just discovered a charming but irrelevant hobby. "We pass oil paintings that likely cost more than my yearly income." Dinner was worse. They seated me between Nathan's great-aunt Florence, who was 90 and nearly deaf, and his cousin Colin, who was 35 and thoroughly intoxicated before the salad was served. "So, Evelyn," Richard said over his soup, "Claire mentioned you raised her on your own. That must have been quite challenging." The word hung in the air like the faint smell of something burning that everyone politely pretends not to notice. "It had its moments," I said evenly, "but we managed just fine." Margaret smiled that sharp smile again. I'm sure you did your best. Single motherhood is so common these days. Of course, children truly benefit from having proper guidance. Colin snorted into his wine glass. Mother means money, Evelyn. Children benefit from having money. Even Claire looked uncomfortable, but she said nothing. Her silence cut deeper than any insult. Richard dabbed his mouth with a linen napkin. Fortunately, Nathan will provide the stability that's been lacking, he said, as if delivering a verdict. That was the moment I finally understood. This wasn't merely about wealth or social class. It was about rewriting my daughter's story, erasing me from her past, and replacing my 29 years of love and sacrifice with their vision of what a proper family should look like. But the worst was still waiting. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and damp, a fitting reflection of the day ahead. I woke before dawn, my stomach twisting in knots that had nothing to do with the piece of toast I couldn't finish. My navy blue dress hung on the closet door like a flag of quiet surrender. 3 months of overtime had paid for that dress, a fraction of what Margaret likely spent on a casual lunch, but it was neat, pressed, and dignified. It was the best I could do. The Brookfield Country Club was every bit as grand as I had imagined. Marble columns, glittering chandeliers, and staff who could spot an outsider from 50 yards away. I parked my 12-year-old Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling as though I had contaminated the luxury around me. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy. Women in dresses that cost more than my monthly rent exchanged air kisses near one another's cheeks. Men in suits worth thousands discussed golf scores and stock portfolios. I lingered near the gift table, clutching my carefully wrapped present, a hand-carved jewelry box I had found at an antique shop in Hartford. The maple wood was warm and golden, the lid etched with delicate roses. I had spent weeks searching for something that felt personal, something special enough for my daughter's wedding day. Oh my! Margaret's voice drifted from across the room before I even saw her. She stood surrounded by a circle of women, her tone light and carrying just enough for me to hear. Such an interesting mix of guests today. Claire has such a generous heart, including everyone. That last word, everyone, made her meaning unmistakable. I pretended to study the gift table, tracing the name tags on the elegant packages wrapped in Tiffany blue and Cartier gold. My humble jewelry box looked almost invisible beside them, but it had been chosen with love. I told myself that still mattered. Then I saw her. Claire descended the grand marble staircase like a vision from a bridal magazine, radiant, graceful, and impossibly beautiful. For a fleeting moment, pride swelled in my chest. This was my child, the baby I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had comforted through heartbreak, the young woman I had cheered through college graduation. And then she saw me. I watched her expression shift in an instant. Her face went blank, utterly devoid of recognition, as though someone had wiped away every trace of memory connecting us. The transformation was subtle yet absolute. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and her eyes slid past me like I was a stranger loitering near the wall. She had practiced this moment. That realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't shock or confusion. It was deliberate. Margaret appeared beside her, draping an elegant arm around Claire's shoulders. "Claire, darling," she said in a voice dripping with approval, "you look radiant. Everyone is absolutely thrilled to meet you." They moved together through the crowd like visiting royalty, accepting praise and congratulations while I stood near the gift table, still holding my small box, watching my daughter charm people who wouldn't even have glanced in my direction. "Ma'am," a young server said softly beside me, "the ceremony is about to begin. Would you like me to show you to your seat?" "Yes, please," I replied, grateful for the distraction. She guided me through clusters of elegant guests toward the back of the room. My seat was tucked behind a marble pillar that obscured half the view of the altar. Row after row of Whitmores and their society friends filled the front, while 3 modest chairs in the back corner represented my entire family's presence. It was me, my sister Diane, who had driven down from Vermont, and Mrs. Graham, my elderly neighbor who had loved Claire like her own granddaughter. "Well," Diane murmured with a smirk as she sat down beside me, "this is cozy. Leave it to my sister to find humor in humiliation." She surveyed the grand hall with the sharp, assessing gaze of a woman who had spent 40 years teaching middle school. "Did you see the gift table?" she whispered. There's a present there from the governor of Massachusetts. Really? I asked half-dazed. Really, she said. And another from some British lord whose name I can't even pronounce. The string quartet began to play, and a hush rippled through the room as everyone rose from their seats. The processional had begun. Bridesmaids in identical soft pink gowns drifted down the aisle like petals caught on a gentle breeze, followed by the flower girl, Nathan's young niece. A tiny blonde child scattering rose petals as if she were blessing the ground beneath her. Then came Claire. She was radiant, walking alone, or at least that's what I thought until I saw the man at her side. I had assumed she would honor her father's memory by walking alone, since he had passed away when she was only 7. But apparently, Richard Whitmore III had volunteered to escort her, and she had agreed. My daughter had chosen her future father-in-law over the mother, who had raised her single-handedly. As she passed our row, her gaze met mine for the briefest moment. For an instant I thought I saw something, recognition, perhaps even guilt, but it vanished so quickly that I began to question whether I had imagined it at all. The ceremony itself was elegant and glacial, filled with readings about legacy, tradition, and family honor. Words that sounded more like warnings than blessings. When the minister reached the part where he asked if anyone objected, the crowd responded with a polite, nervous laugh. I stayed silent, though the words I wanted to say screamed inside my head. I object to my daughter pretending I don't exist. Instead, I stood still as she vowed to love and cherish a man whose family had spent 6 long months meticulously erasing me from her life. When the vows ended and applause echoed through the hall, it was official. She was no longer Claire Carter, she was Claire Whitmore. And that meant it was time for the reception, the stage for my final humiliation. The cocktail hour was when the Whitmores revealed their true nature. I had barely stepped into the reception area when a woman in a shimmering silver gown, her neck draped in enough diamonds to finance a small country, approached with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "You must be Evelyn," she said, though we had never met. Apparently, gossip traveled faster than light in circles like these. "I'm Elaine Prescott, Margaret's sister," she continued brightly. "I understand you're helping with the service today?" For a moment I froze, unsure I'd heard her correctly. Helping with the service? Not the mother of the bride. Not even a guest, just staff. Actually, I began, but she interrupted before I could finish. "Oh, wonderful. Be a dear and fetch me another glass, would you? The Dom Perignon, please, not the regular champagne. I can always tell the difference." She pressed her empty flute into my hands and floated away, leaving me standing there like a fool, the glass slick in my grip. Around me, laughter and conversation swelled. Crystal clinking, designer heels tapping against marble, and the sound of privilege humming like a well-tuned orchestra. No one seemed to notice that the mother of the bride had just been mistaken for the hired help. Well, almost no one. A young server approached me, concern flickering in her tired eyes. She couldn't have been more than 20, with the weary posture of someone juggling classes, rent, and 2 other jobs. "Ma'am, are you all right? You look a little lost." I forced a smile. "Just getting my bearings," I said, setting the flute down on a table covered in white orchids that probably cost more than my grocery budget for the month. She hesitated, glancing nervously around to make sure her supervisor wasn't watching. "I don't mean to offend, but my boss mentioned there might be some confusion about the staff today. Are you supposed to be working this event?" Even the actual staff could tell I didn't belong among the guests. That was the moment the full weight of my daughter's betrayal hit me. Not just a pang of sadness, but a freight train of humiliation. Claire hadn't simply trimmed the guest list or hidden her roots. She had arranged this. She had ensured that I would be mistaken for someone paid to serve. The woman I had raised alone, supported through college, and loved unconditionally for 29 years had orchestrated my public erasure with surgical precision. "No, sweetheart," I said gently, keeping my tone calm even as my hands trembled. "I'm not working. I'm the bride's mother." The girl's eyes went wide with horror. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Mrs. Whitmore told us all the family would be seated at the head table, so when I saw you back here I just assumed." She stopped herself mid-sentence, realizing that she was only making things worse. Mrs. Whitmore. That name no longer belonged to me. My daughter had claimed it, And she had made sure everyone understood that the family worth acknowledging sat in designer gowns and custom tuxedos at the front of the room. "It's not your fault," I said softly, sparing the young woman any more discomfort. "Seems like there's been a bit of confusion all around today." Confusion. That word felt laughable. What had taken place wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an execution of character. Across the room, I spotted Claire laughing at something Nathan whispered in her ear. She looked radiant, carefree, utterly unburdened by the mother she had erased. Her gown probably cost more than I earned in 6 months, and she wore it like armor shielding her from her past. But as I watched her glide through that glittering crowd of sharks dressed in couture, a realization struck me like cold steel. My daughter's betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was a performance she had been perfecting for months. Every exclusion, every adjustment, every polite slight had been building to this grand finale, where I would stand forgotten in a corner while she stepped seamlessly into a new life, one that didn't include me. And the most painful truth of all? She was good at it. The same little girl who once cried over stepping on an ant had grown into a woman who could dismantle her mother's dignity without so much as a blink. But there was something she had overlooked, something she must have forgotten about the woman who raised her. I wasn't the kind to surrender quietly. I had spent 40 years surviving people who underestimated me. Dinner was announced with the kind of pomp that might have accompanied a royal coronation. The head table shimmered with gold-rimmed china and crystal that probably cost more than my car. Claire sat like a princess receiving adoration, smiling as a parade of well-wishers congratulated her as though she had accomplished something noble rather than simply marrying into money. I found my place at a small table tucked behind a massive potted palm at the far edge of the room, a spot so remote it might as well have had its own zip code. My tablemates were an eclectic mix of those quietly deemed expendable, the florist, the photographer's assistant, 2 elderly cousins who had been judged too eccentric for visibility, and a forgotten +1 whose date had already drifted toward better company. "Well, this is cozy," Cousin Ruth muttered, adjusting her hearing aid and squinting at the distant head table. "I haven't been stuck at the reject table since your Uncle Harold's 2nd wedding. At least that time we got dinner rolls." Her dry humor might have made me smile under different circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was seated among the very people who had actually contributed something meaningful to this wedding. The florist whose flowers filled the hall with fragrance, the assistant who would preserve every moment in photographs, and relatives who carried the family's true history. Meanwhile, the head table gleamed with people whose only contributions were their wealth and their practiced disdain for anyone who worked for a living. Richard Whitmore III rose from his seat, tapping his crystal glass with a sterling silver knife that likely cost more than my monthly rent. The gentle chime silenced the crowd instantly. His voice carried across the hall smooth, practiced, and polished by decades of boardroom presentations and country club speeches. "Today," he began, "we celebrate not merely a union between 2 people, but the joining of 2 families, families bound by shared values and traditions. Nathan and Claire represent the best of what the next generation can achieve when they're raised with proper guidance and support." Shared values. I nearly choked on my water. What values were those exactly? The kind that prize wealth above loyalty? The kind that teach you to erase people who no longer fit your image? The belief that love can be purchased with enough champagne and the right venue? Proper guidance. 29 years of raising a daughter alone apparently didn't qualify. Not the nights I spent helping with homework, the school projects done at midnight, the soccer games I watched from the bleachers alone while other parents sat hand in hand. Not the sacrifices that left me with calloused hands and an empty savings account so she could attend a good college. None of that counted as guidance in Richard Whitmore's version of reality. He continued his speech, a steady stream of elegant nonsense, platitudes about legacy, tradition, and the preservation of family honor. Words that sounded profound but dissolved into air once you stripped away the expensive packaging. I watched the crowd nod along dutifully, sipping their imported wine while mentally calculating the price of the floral arrangements. The photographer drifted between tables, snapping candid smiles and posed perfection. When she reached mine, she hesitated, frowning slightly as she checked her notes. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Are you Evelyn Carter?" "Yes," I replied. "I'm the bride's mother." Her brows knit together. "That's what I thought." It's just, well, I was told by the wedding planner that there wouldn't be any photos from the bride's side. Only formal portraits of the Whitmore family. No photos. No evidence. My daughter had made certain that her wedding album, the glossy, perfect record of her new life, would contain no trace of me. Future generations of Whitmores would flip through those pages and never know that the bride had once been a little girl raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs, who gave up her dreams so her child could have her own. I see, I said evenly, my voice calm though my chest felt heavy with something sharp and cold. Well, perhaps you could take one quick photo of our table. For the record. The photographer gave me a sympathetic look and lifted her camera. As the flash went off, I thought about all the photographs that would be missing from this day. The mother and daughter getting ready together, the tearful moment of helping her into her dress, the shared laughter before she walked down the aisle. There would be no portraits showing 3 generations of women. No mother-daughter dance under soft lights where I would have told her how proud I was. Claire had erased me completely, not just from the event but from history. In her carefully edited version of life, she had no mother. She had either been raised by the Whitmores or conjured from ambition itself. But what my daughter didn't know, what she had forgotten, was that 40 years of investigating insurance claims teaches you how to recognize when something doesn't add up. And something about all of this was wrong. Very wrong. When the band took a break, I quietly excused myself, saying I needed to find the restroom. Instead, I followed my instincts, the same ones that had helped me unravel hundreds of lies over the years, and wandered toward the club's business office. Call it professional curiosity or the reflexes of a woman who had made a career out of following paper trails. The door was slightly ajar, and from inside came familiar voices, calm, composed, but carrying the kind of tension that meant trouble. It's absolutely crucial that no connections can be seen by anyone on the outside, Richard was saying, his tone clipped with stress. The SEC investigation is still active, and they're specifically looking for patterns in our social network. My body froze. The SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. My heartbeat quickened. Daddy, you're being paranoid, Nathan replied, though his voice wavered, the confidence cracking at the edges. No one's going to trace anything back to the family trust. The shell companies are clean. The guest list alone would raise questions if someone decided to dig deeper, Richard continued. That's why we needed to keep certain individuals away from this event. People with the wrong kind of professional background. My blood turned cold. This wasn't about embarrassment or class. This was about something far darker. What about Evelyn? Margaret's voice cut through the air, tight with panic. She could become a real issue if she starts asking questions. Her job makes her dangerous. She's exactly the kind of person who might notice things she shouldn't. She won't be a problem, Claire said, my daughter's voice calm and certain. Hearing her speak made my heart stop. Trust me, Mother, she continued. I know exactly how to handle her. She's so desperate for my approval that she'll believe whatever I tell her. Mother. She had called Margaret mother, the same word she had once said to me with such love and trust. And now she spoke about me like I was a stray dog to be managed. Good, Richard said, his tone smooth and cold, the voice of a man used to eliminating obstacles. The less she knows about Nathan's business activities, the safer everyone will be. A claims adjuster with her experience would spot inconsistencies immediately if she saw the right documents. That was the moment everything clicked. The way tumblers align in a lock before it opens to reveal what's been hidden behind it all along. My profession wasn't just an embarrassment to them. It was a genuine threat. I had spent 2 decades untangling insurance fraud, tracking paper trails, connecting dots others ignored, building airtight cases that sent more than one overconfident criminal to federal prison. And it became painfully clear that the Whitmore family had plenty of dots they didn't want me connecting. I slipped quietly away from the half-open office door and made my way back to my table, my mind spinning through a dozen grim possibilities. What kind of Securities and Exchange Commission investigation involved wedding guest lists? What sort of business dealings required shell companies to hide their tracks? And why, exactly, was my daughter so confident she could manipulate me into silence about whatever her new family was hiding? When the band returned from their break, the lead singer announced the father-daughter dance. Richard escorted Claire onto the dance floor to the sound of camera shutters clicking in perfect rhythm. She looked up at him with the same adoring expression she used to save for me back when I was her whole world. They began to sway to the opening notes of My Girl, the lullaby I used to sing to her when thunderstorms frightened her as a child. Watching them together, I understood what this wedding truly was. Not a celebration but a burial. A burial of truth, of evidence, of anyone who could threaten the Whitmore illusion of perfection, including me. But in their arrogance, they had made one fatal miscalculation. They assumed a working-class woman from Hartford would be too intimidated by wealth and prestige to fight back. They had no idea what kind of woman they were dealing with. One who had raised a child alone, worked full-time while attending night classes, and spent 40 years catching people who believed they were too clever to be caught. It was time to teach them what proper guidance really looked like. My moment came during the cake-cutting ceremony. While the crowd oohed and awed at the 4-tier masterpiece of vanilla fondant and sugar flowers that could have doubled as a botanical exhibit. As cameras flashed, I slipped over to the bandleader during a lull in the music. "Excuse me," I said politely, showing him my driver's license with Evelyn Carter printed beside my photo. "I'm the bride's mother. I'd like to make a brief announcement after the cake cutting if that's all right." He blinked, surprised. Probably because no one had told him the bride even had a mother, but he recovered quickly and nodded with professional courtesy. "Of course, ma'am. Just give me a signal when you're ready." I returned to my seat and watched as Claire playfully fed Nathan a forkful of cake, her laughter echoing through the room. For a fleeting second my heart softened. Her smile, bright and unguarded, reminded me of the little girl who used to stand on a chair beside me in our tiny kitchen, helping stir cookie dough for school fundraisers and sneaking chocolate chips when she thought I wasn't looking. But that little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had chosen privilege over integrity, reputation over love, and wealth over the mother who had given her everything. You see, while the Whitmores had been busy congratulating themselves for their polished deception and celebrating their flawless exclusion of anyone inconvenient, I had been doing what I do best, investigating. During my restroom break, I hadn't merely overheard their conversation, I had gathered evidence. Before slipping away, I had taken several clear photographs of the papers left scattered on Richard's mahogany desk. Insurance claims, 3 of them, each from a different company, all signed by Nathan in his distinctive handwriting. Each one told the same story. Suspicious property damage occurring at miraculously convenient times, just before major payments came due. There had been the boat fire, 2 days before his business loan payment deadline. The car accident that destroyed his luxury sedan, just as his credit cards hit their limits. The apartment flood that happened right before he needed funds for Claire's engagement ring. Every single accident perfectly timed. Every claim just large enough to erase whatever financial trouble Nathan happened to be in. After 20 years of dissecting fraud, I could recognize a pattern faster than most computers could. And Nathan Whitmore had one very consistent pattern. Whenever his finances were collapsing, disaster conveniently struck, and insurance money followed. The investigation Richard mentioned, the one by the Securities and Exchange Commission, I would have bet my pension it tied directly to those phony claims and their tangled network of shell corporations. And I would have bet my life savings that their sudden, urgent need to keep me off guest lists had everything to do with my ability to recognize criminal accounting when I saw it. My poor daughter. She thought she was marrying into security and sophistication, that this family would elevate her life and finally make her one of them. In reality, she had just stepped into the center of a federal crime ring, one that the FBI would eventually trace straight back to her new husband's signature. And when that happened, ignorance wouldn't save her, nor would the family name she'd been so desperate to claim. Most painfully of all, she had burned the one bridge that might have saved her, the mother who could have helped her navigate the storm to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader's voice boomed through the microphone, "we have a special request for an announcement from a member of the wedding party." The music faded. Conversations trailed off. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the small stage as I walked, unhurried and steady, to the center of the dance floor. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who was this woman in the clearance rack dress, interrupting their perfect evening? Then Claire saw me. Her face drained of color. She grabbed Nathan's arm so tightly her manicured nails left marks in his tuxedo sleeve. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this beautiful wedding," I began, my voice clear through the speakers. I'm Evelyn Carter, the bride's mother. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Heads turned. A few Whitmores exchanged looks of shock, realization dawning in their eyes. They had done such a thorough job erasing me that some guests genuinely looked surprised to discover that the bride had a mother at all. I have something very important to share with everyone here tonight. I began, letting my gaze sweep across the glittering crowd, especially my daughter and her new family. For the first time all evening, I saw something break through Richard Whitmore's carefully maintained composure: fear. Real tangible fear. He pushed his chair back and started toward me, likely intending to snatch the microphone away, but it was already far too late. The truth was out of its cage, and nothing in this room, not his money, not his reputation, could stop what was coming. I've just come across some fascinating information about the Whitmore family's business practices. I continued, my tone calm and precise. And I believe everyone here deserves to know exactly who it is they're celebrating tonight. The room went utterly still. You could have heard a pin drop onto the marble floor. I lifted my phone high enough for the crowd to see. Earlier this evening, I said, I stumbled upon some rather interesting insurance documents. Documents that reveal a very specific pattern of conveniently timed accidents and suspicious claims. All linked to one individual here tonight. Nathan's complexion drained to a shade of gray that belonged on old newspaper, not living skin. His jaw worked soundlessly while Margaret clutched Richard's arm, her polished facade shattering as panic flickered behind her eyes. A low murmur rippled through the guests, an uneasy rustle of silk gowns and shifting chairs, as if they could feel the room tilting toward disaster but couldn't yet see how far it would fall. I've spent 20 years investigating insurance fraud, I told them evenly. And I know these patterns better than most. Multiple claims in short succession, each one coinciding with sudden financial strain. Accidents that just happen to involve very expensive assets at very convenient times. I let the silence breathe, long enough for my words to settle over Boston's elite like a spreading shadow. The kinds of assets people like the Whitmores own, I went on, and the sort of expenses that come with maintaining a Beacon Hill mansion and Nantucket estate, and the lifestyle necessary to impress circles like this one. The quiet that followed was absolute, so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Even the catering staff had frozen in place, hands hovering above trays and crystal flutes as the tension thickened the air like smoke. But here's what I found most remarkable, I said softly, my voice turning smooth and dangerous. The very same documents I photographed tonight are already part of an active investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Which explains, quite neatly, why my daughter here was so eager to distance herself from the one person in this room qualified to recognize fraud when she saw it spread across a mahogany desk. Claire's face crumpled, not from guilt but from dawning terror. She finally understood that she hadn't just married into wealth. She had married into a crime scene. Nathan, Richard hissed through clenched teeth, but I wasn't finished. Oh, but the best part, I said, turning to address the now stunned audience, is that every one of these fraudulent claims was filed after Nathan proposed to my daughter. Almost as if he needed fast money to fund a wedding grand enough to polish his family's reputation and conceal their ongoing criminal activity. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. The photographers, both professional and guests, were frantic to document every detail. Every pale face, every horrified expression. Tomorrow's society pages, I thought, would make delicious reading. So, I said clearly, I have a very special wedding gift for my daughter. All eyes were on me now. My gift, I announced, is complete transparency. About the family she's just tied herself to in the eyes of the law. I held up my phone once more, its screen glowing under the chandeliers. I've already sent copies of these documents to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the SEC, and 3 major newspapers. Because that, my dear, is what proper guidance really looks like. Teaching your children to stand up to bullies and criminals, even when they wear $1,000 suits and hide behind inherited privilege. That was when Richard lunged. His calm, cultivated exterior shattered completely. But before he reached me, several figures moved swiftly from the side doors of the ballroom, badges glinting under the chandeliers. Richard Whitmore, the lead agent declared, her voice firm and echoing through the stunned silence. You are under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering. The elegant event dissolved into chaos. Guests screamed and scattered, chairs toppled, crystal shattered on marble floors. Federal agents fanned through the crowd, reading rights to half the people seated at the head table, while Boston's upper crust tried to distance themselves from the very family they'd been applauding moments before. Claire stood motionless in the middle of it all, still wearing her pristine wedding gown, her bouquet slipping from her hands as her perfect world crumbled around her like spun sugar dissolving in rain. I walked toward her slowly, reached out, and took her trembling hands in mine. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her expression a blur of confusion and regret. "Honey," I said softly, my voice steady despite everything. "When you're ready to come home to people who love you for who you are, not for what you can do for them, I'll be waiting." Then I picked up my purse, gave a small nod to my sister Diane, who stood by the exit watching the pandemonium with a look of grim satisfaction, and walked out of the Brookfield Country Club with my head high and my dignity unshaken. Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't loud or violent. It's simply refusing to vanish when people try to erase you. And sometimes it's allowing the truth to surface precisely when it will cause the most damage to those who have earned every ounce of their downfall. The next morning's headlines blared across Boston. Society wedding turns FBI sting operation. Prominent family arrested in $1 million insurance fraud scheme. But the moment that mattered most came 3 days later, with a soft knock at my front door. When I opened it, there stood Claire, still in her travel suit, tears streaking her face. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with real remorse. "I'm so sorry for everything. Please, can I come home?" I opened my arms, and she fell into them the way she had when she was 7 years old, sobbing into my shoulder. Some bridges, I've learned, can be rebuilt if both people are willing to lay down new foundations made of honesty, forgiveness, and love that asks for nothing in return. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you've ever faced betrayal and found your way back to truth, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.